I'm Connor Rebush, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. I am Connor Rebush, your host as always, and with me is Patrick Wyman. It's bright and early over there in California, isn't it, Pat?
It is very early for me.
Not so bright though. You were telling me about the June gloom you have going on over there.
Yeah, it's feel like I've barely seen the sun. I realize this is a stupid and awful complaint for somebody who lives in Southern California. But hey, you know what? If I wouldn't be a proper Southern Californian if I weren't complaining about something that is easily rectifiable.
I live in California. It's not sunny enough. That's basically the complaint right here.
Yeah, well, still get more sun than everybody.
This is true.
That's right.
This is true.
And that voice you're hearing on the line, everybody, is a gentleman that Pat and I are both very happy to be joined by today. That is former UFC fighter, former Strikeforce fighter, former seems damn near everything fighter, Jason High, and the unfair victim of New Mexico Athletic Commission justice for this last year. Jason was suspended by the New Mexico Athletic Commission for hurting Kevin Mulhall's feelings. How's this year off been for you, Jason?
It's been, not too. It's been, I'd say, mediocre. Nah, it's been a good year, man. I mean, I can't really complain. I guess, I'm not starving, so
that's good. And I saw over on an interview with Sean Al-Shadi on MMA Fighting, you seem to be raring to get back into the game. Do you have any fights or any kind of deals that are looking good for you right now that you might be getting back into the game?
I think I'll know something in the next couple weeks.
Cool.
So
very cool.
Yeah.
I believe the highlight quote of the article was, "I've been sharpening my utensils and waiting to eat." Something like that.
Waiting to eat, baby. You know how it is.
I like
waiting
that.
To eat.
So why don't we talk a little about your background, Jason? Because you fought all over. You kind of seem.
I have, man. I was just thinking about that the other day. My business partner, LC Davis, you guys know him also.
Oh yes.
I was trying to think of a major organization that either him or I hasn't fought in, and I was like, maybe Pride is the only one,
Yeah, and that's only just by lack of opportunity. Now I'm sure you guys probably would have wound up there had you been able to.
That would have been great.
So
between the two of you fought because he fought in the WEC.
WEC. He also fought in the IFL.
Oh God, I'd forgotten that he fought in the IFL. Yeah. So the IFL, the WEC, Strikeforce, Dream, K1 Dynamite show.
Yep, Sengoku for him.
God. Sengoku.
Oh, also and Affliction for you.
Affliction for both of us, actually.
Oh God. Yeah.
And the UFC. So and that's not only a bunch of different locations, but it's a lot of different rule sets as well. You had unified rules in Affliction, you had the limited Strikeforce rules, you had the wonky Dream rules.
I think when I was at Strikeforce, I think they had just introduced elbows, or maybe I had one fight and then there was elbows the next fight, but they did for a minute not have elbows.
So I'm interested to know which of those you found most conducive to your style. Which of those rule sets and promotions were did you enjoy the most?
I really think the unified rules. I don't know. I like the Dream rules though. The Dream rules are great. I never got to land a clean knee on somebody like a grounded opponent, but I think that just adds another dimension to the game. I mean, I'm not sure which I'd rather have between that and elbows. I kind of like elbows too. But it's just really fun to be able to knee a downed opponent.
Well, and that's a tremendous asset for somebody with your style and for top position striking in
Definitely
MMA.
is.
Period.
But also so is elbows. For somebody that likes to ground and grind people, elbows are just invaluable. You kind of have to be outside of somebody's guard to use the knees. Or in a scramble position, but you can use elbows from just about anywhere, even standing.
Somebody who has your kind of front headlock game, I would think, would benefit from those elbows as well, because I mean you've got a nasty guillotine that you can find from a bunch of different spots, and so somebody trying to roll to escape, I would think that you would be able to find opportunities for those.
Absolutely. I mean, elbows I haven't landed it gets harder to land them at the higher levels, but it's always something that's good to use and to open up position and do that kind of thing.
Well, speaking of those little strikes and transitions, we talked last week on the show about ground and pound, and in fact, it seems like it's been something that I've just been obsessed with for the past week. I was talking about Cain Velasquez's ground and pound. I was talking about Mirsad Bektic's ground and pound, a man that you know very well, and Pat and I were saying before the show that we think you really kind of demonstrate a good representation of where the ground striking metagame is at in MMA right now, which Pat kind of described, I think, as like the ATT ground and pound style. Do you think of yourself as having a very, do you think of that as being a strong area of your skill set, being able to strike from top position?
Yeah, definitely. As a wrestler, taking somebody down and holding position and just being able to beat them up is something that kind of, just all I had to do was start punching people, basically, when I moved to jiu-jitsu. So, you always want to find the best way to do that. And really, you say that the American Top Team style, like Liborio, drills that. We drill that a lot when I'm down there. And I'm sure, Mersad's been drilling it. All those guys drill a lot. So I've been drilling it up here, I kind of, took some of the drills that he'd have us do. They're basically just, they're drills like any other drills. You get in a common position and you work on common things opponents might do, and then you work on just taking the intensity down and working on the technique, doing it over and over and over and over again.
So it's been really striking to both Connor and I how many gyms don't really train ground striking. I mean, they'll train the positional aspects of it, and then they'll kind of mime throwing a few punches, but then they won't necessarily really work on things like posture or really torquing into the shots or really the actual technique of ground striking. I mean, they'll figure out where you can throw that, but then the actual practice of it doesn't come into play. But then when you go to places like ATT or Kings in Southern California or TriStar or like some of the other really big gyms, that there's a much more of an emphasis placed on the actual mechanics of ground striking and actually drilling it.
Yeah, I think that's all kind of the evolution of MMA. It's kind of, you have to blur those lines between jiu-jitsu and MMA. So a lot of guys focus on when they're in the guard, they focus on passing guard, and that just comes from jiu-jitsu. Like, I want to pass the guard. That's the only thing I really need to be doing now. And in MMA, you can do damage. You don't really need to pass guard. It's hard to submit somebody. I mean, for a savvy opponent, it's hard to submit a savvy opponent inside the guard. It's going to be in today's world of MMA. Because I'm not just trying to pass the guard. I'm trying to knock your head off also. So,
and then you got to have a really cool head to react to that kind of stuff from guard to even play a submission game when a guy is just hammering your face.
Yeah, man. The best. For me, in my opinion, the best option in today's MMA is to try to get back up, So.
And we were saying that before we began recording, that's really what we identify as the ATT style, or even more broadly as the modern MMA style, is you have a system where you're on top and you're doing damage. If you get into trouble, you just stand up. I think there was no better example of that than your fight with Quinn Mulhern in Strikeforce, which was like the ultimate example of brutal rinse and repeat fighting, where it was like you would take Mulhern down, you'd hit these really slick reactive takedowns off of these duck unders, or you'd hit a left hand, do a knee tap, he'd fall to his back, you'd hit him once, fall into his guard, got tangled up a little bit, and you're like, all right, I'm just going to stand up and do it all over again, which is it's not risk averse, it's just a smart way to still do maximum damage to the opponent.
Yeah, I think it's not super it's just efficient, Mm-hmm. I mean, that's really the name of the game. I mean, at the higher level, the higher you get, the higher you climb on that ladder, it's about who's more efficient and who's more just they're not making mistakes. People aren't making mistakes. So you can't be that first guy to make the first mistake. You have to be going and imposing your will. So I mean, that all comes down to just starts in the gym. A lot of people don't understand that it all starts in the gym, from drilling, staying focused when you're drilling, and just through the whole time.
There's been a lot of talk lately about the hard sparring mindset of guys like Cain Velasquez, Daniel Cormier, guys like AKA, places like Rufus Sport. A lot of complaints about fighters getting injured. What do you feel the place of hard sparring is in MMA training? Is it less or more important than drilling, or?
I'm on the fence about that right now, because, man, I feel like me, myself, personally, I need to spar, I need to feel that hard blow, the guy's actually trying to, he's not trying to hurt you, but, he's definitely trying to push you, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like if you have a group that you trust, that you could spar hard with, where you're training on that edge, it really is all about, like, in any sport, it's about pushing to the edge, but not pushing over, So I feel like hard sparring definitely has a place in the game. But, that being said, there's a lot of people, not a lot of people, but, just training practices that some people only want to go live, So and you definitely need to do the drills. If you're gonna do the live part, you got to do the drills too, man. So.
Because past a certain point, right, you just end up. It just ends up kind of devolving into a fight, and that was always the complaint about places like Chute Box back in the day. It was like, how much are you actually learning, and how much are you actually growing if there's so much emphasis placed on the live aspect of it? Like, when are you actually going to put into use any of the things that you're learning?
Some people respond to that kind of environment. It's like. My fiance is a runner, you guys might know, and she used to run 100-mile weeks, which is, I guess, is pretty unheard of. I mean, it sounds like ridiculous to me. I could never run 100 miles in a week, right? But, a lot of people aren't doing that, but she's just trying to push that line and see, because, it's her body's responding to it. So she's trying to push it, more is better is what kind of the mindset you get into, So, what was your original question?
Yeah, it was just something along those lines about so if you're thinking about hard sparring, like, how many times a week would you think would be optimal for that?
Okay, so, man, I would probably, I'm 33, so I don't know. I kind of sparred hard, not a lot, but a little bit earlier in my career, and I feel like when I'm just doing like maintenance training, this pretty much this whole year has been maintenance training. I'll spar once a week, hard. And then, if I'll take a few weeks off here and there, and then sometimes I'll spar two times a week. But for the most part, it's more controlled sparring. But, you gotta get in there and spar every now and then.
For sure. And I think, oh, go on. Sorry.
Go ahead. I'm just saying, especially like, if this is your 9 to 5, you gotta spar, I think.
And I think the response from a lot of fans has kind of been like too much of a backlash against the very idea of hard sparring, as if it's just not needed at all. And it seems like the way you talk about it, like it's kind of a pressure test. It's kind of something to keep you almost like placing the new skills that you're learning, or the skills that you're trying to keep sharp in context. Like I have to realize why I'm doing, why I'm training these skills. I have to test to make sure I'm actually learning to use them in, live combat.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, you'll see this this is why people like jiu-jitsu, right? Is because like you can go super hard against an unwilling opponent and everybody can come out just fine on the other side,
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you have to get as close as you can to that with MMA, So, I mean, I don't want to go into a fight at all without sparring. These fans that don't, they never live the life, bro. You gotta spar, man. You just gotta know what that's like, to have a guy coming after you a little bit, a training partner. You gotta be pushed. And if you're not pushing your skills, then what are you doing? You're the same fighter from fight to fight. That's no good.
if you're not gonna, I mean, and if you're not gonna go reasonably hard, it's really difficult to hone things like aggressiveness and killer instinct. Like
Exactly. It's hard to hone everything, if you don't know, what, like I said, what it's like against an unwilling opponent,
Yeah, I mean, and it's hard. I mean, hard to deal with the adrenaline. Hard to figure out how to keep your heart rate down. All of those things, like those, can only happen if you're actually putting yourself in a situation where there's some modicum of actual danger to yourself.
Yeah, it's definitely stuff that needs to be practiced,
Okay, I think we'll take one short break here, guys, and then when we come back, Jason, if you've got some more time, we will have some more questions for you. Okay, wait, stop. Don't skip this break. I know you skip most of them. It's a podcast. It's not a radio show. You don't have to listen to the commercials. But if you follow my very simple instructions, you'll be doing a huge service to Heavy Hands, Pat, and myself. First, go to Stitcher.com or iTunes.com. You can use either of those services to subscribe to the show, which makes it really, really easy to listen to every episode and not have to go hunting for it on our confusing, badly designed website. Once you're there, give us a positive rating and a positive review. That means go to the little 5-star thing and click on the star all the way to the right. That's a 5-star rating. That's the best one you could possibly give us. And like 20 or 30 words about how you enjoy the show. It may not seem like much, but it's a huge help to us, and we really appreciate it. It helps us bring Heavy Hands to an ever-increasing audience, which is just good for everybody. So thank you for listening. Please take the time to give us a positive rating and review. Next time that you're on at your computer, at your phone, whatever, iTunes.com, Stitcher.com, search for Heavy Hands, give a positive rating and a review. Thank you. And now, back to the show. And we are back. Jason, I thought I might ask you a few more questions about our topic of last week of ground striking. You mentioned that you're drilling positions, you're trying to drill common reactions that the opponents might have and trying to adjust to those. I was wondering if, last week Pat and I kind of asked each other, and we're kind of novices to this. Like, we both, I think of ourselves as striking, not necessarily experts, but we're striking enthusiasts at the very least. And so learning the sort of unique skill set that is ground striking is something that's kind of new for us, and that makes it very interesting. And we asked each other what we thought the fundamentals of ground striking were. Do you think that you have a couple answers for that? What to you are fundamental techniques of beating up an opponent when their back is on the floor?
Okay, are we talking about from the guard?
From any position. If you just think there's even just a fundamental concept that sort of rules your mindset of ground striking.
Maybe I would say if I had to pick one rule, it would be to keep your hands off the mat, I'd say. I mean, it kind of changes in every position, but, for instance, from the guard, I try to kind of keep my arms in towards his armpits, and have good posture. That way I know he's going to be trying to either pull me in with his legs or reach up, and I can predict reactions off of that,
That's something I've noticed in a couple of your fights too, and in ground and pound in general. It seems like it's a really it's an important thing to be able to kind of post on the opponent, where you kind of have to use, even if he might be a weird kind of moving surface, you kind of have to be able to push off of him to generate the space to drive power. Even sometimes using punches. Like I know Anderson Silva would often just hit a guy in the face and then use the fist that had just hit the guy in the face as a sort of post to then generate enough space to land the punch from the other hand.
Yeah, and that's stuff that you probably drill also. Just certain opponents' reactions, like him pulling you in, you ducking out the side, landing a punch over the top, and then him coming to try to tie you up again. With that overhook, which would mean your hands would be on the mat. So. I mean, once a guy, it's a little easier in no-gi to clear your arms, obviously, because of the sweat and everything.
Sure.
But, once a guy, he gets your hands on the mat, starts overhooking, and he can start moving his hips out to maybe bring his knee up on your bicep, kind of like Nogueira style, He would play that half knee on overhook, It's like a semi spider, whatever, half spider, whatever. So, once you get there, now you're in trouble. Now you're not in trouble, but he's broken your posture. He's got an angle with your hips, and you have to remedy that before you can punch again. So it's just best not to allow him to get to those positions.
And how about body punches? Because that's something that you do a lot from top position that not a lot of fighters really seem to go to. Do you? I mean, I don't know why. Why do you think it is that most people just don't? They might attack the body and the feet, and once they get to standing in open guard or something, they just headhunt like mad.
There's one thing. Well, first I would use body punches to just to set up, maybe to clear my hands, or to set up the punches to the head. Or if he's broken my posture, I might use body punches to work my hands back in.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? I found in general on both sides of this coin that body punches really don't hurt as much when you're laying down. I don't know. Maybe that's why people lay down when they get hit in the body, But I don't know, dude. It just doesn't. I mean, because I don't know. It just doesn't hurt as much as a standing body shot, Like,
it's interesting.
I'm not sure what it is, but that's in my experience.
Well, I think from the top there too, it's really hard to torque, especially if your posture is broken.
Generate enough power. What you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
You can't attack the body the same way you might with like a left hook to the liver on the feet. How about How about this? This to me is like one of the fundamental techniques of ground striking. Maybe it's just one of the oldest ones that still gets a lot of use, and especially from you. For example, again in that Quinn Mulhern fight, you use the sort of, I guess I would call it a leg drag punch a lot, as sort of a partial guard pass where you throw the legs by, you use that to get the feet off your hips and or out of your face, and to then load up your hips to then come down with a punch. Is that something that, how do you train something like that where you're really like launching your full body weight into an opponent on the ground?
That's definitely an old faithful. Probably one of the first things you learn as a guy that likes to ground and pound, bypass the legs. But you can do that in practice, You learn how to pull it. But you can definitely practice that. I mean, that's another reason why you don't want to be hanging out under a guy in MMA.
Yeah.
Anybody can do that nowadays. Like, people are more well-rounded. Anybody can end somebody's night. From the top position these days.
Yeah, so kind of playing off of that, do you find that you kind of have to change your approach to ground striking depending on the opponent that you're dealing with, in the sense that there are going to be some people that you fight who are more or less willing to stay on the bottom?
Yeah, I'd say it still boils down to a couple simple things, but if a guy is posting on your hips with his feet, the best thing to do is to stand up, instead of chasing him on your knees. So, I mean, that way you can be the first one to your feet if it should go back to the feet. But also it's easier to hold him down and press into him, and eventually, in a fight he's going to run into a barrier, So it's easier to chase him on your feet.
And when those fighters are, trying to get back to their feet, you've talked a lot about this kind of race to get to the feet, and it's just better not to be on the bottom. Now, a couple of years ago, I think the guillotine was kind of seen as dead in MMA. A lot of people were just saying, everyone goes for guillotines, and they don't work a lot. And now we've been seeing kind of a resurgence of the guillotine, which happens to be a special technique of yours. So, do you think that I don't know, maybe just focusing so much on getting back to your feet has given you a better handle on how to catch opponents when they're trying to get up? Because that seems to be when that headlock position and that arm in guillotine that you like so much tends to present itself. Yeah,
recently I do catch it coming up. Like, I'll catch it from, more from bottom position. But, man, I started drilling that thing. I don't even know who taught me about it. But actually, for a finishing trick, Savant Young, I don't know if you guys remember him.
Mm-hmm.
He gave me one of the best tricks that I still tell people is just to crunch in with the guillotine instead of like leaning out.
Does it pain you to see a bunch of guys in the UFC who are like yanking back with the arm in guillotine and just pulling their own arm off the guy's neck?
Yeah, I mean, with the arm, well, it's confusing though, because without an arm you can do it that way.
Yeah,
and that's kind of more proper, but with the arm in, especially like guys that are, like I kind of have big shoulders and chest, to take up some of that negative space in there. But guys, like skinnier guys, if you're leaning away, it's going to be hard to finish for sure. And it takes a lot of horsepower to finish that way. So you're going to be burning out,
How did you feel about some of those guillotines last weekend? Did you catch UFC 188?
I caught the finish. I caught Velasquez. There was one more, huh?
There were two more.
There were fight, I should just say.
Yeah, there were 2 standing guillotines in a row actually on the prelims. Efrain Escudero.
Yes, I saw that one. Efrain versus Drew Dober. Yeah, I mean, I kind of wanted Dober.
And Patrick Williams in the fight right before that put Perez?
Alejandro Perez, yeah.
Put Alejandro Perez a tough. I think he was the winner. Was he? Not the winner. He was one of the finalists?
He won the Ultimate Fighter Latin America.
Okay.
One of the
dude. Armin guillotine is an A1 technique, bro. I mean, it looks like a power smasher move, but it's a technical thing, man. And MMA, it just gives you something else to grab onto, because when they have just the neck, the guy can reach over your shoulder and lift his hips really easily and just alleviate a whole lot of your pressure. But they can't do that with the arm in. They have to give up a position, or it's gonna be hard to get out of that if a guy knows how to finish.
It's a really interesting shift, because even thinking back to 3 or 4 years ago, it seemed like there weren't a whole lot of guys who really knew how to finish the arm in guillotine. So they'd get it and then they would burn their arms out going for it. But now, it seems like the preference actually runs to the arm in guillotine over the straight up guillotine. I remember very distinctly when Vanderlei Silva fought Michael Bisping way back. This was 5 years ago. Vanderlei grabbing an arm-in guillotine and just yanking back like his life depended on it and getting absolutely nowhere with it. But it looked really cool because all the veins on his neck were busting out. But nothing actually happened there. But now guys like Fabricio finishing that arm-in guillotine, and I mean Kane was tapping in seconds after he locked it in.
That's one thing. If you know how to do it, actually, it's tight. It should be tight before you get to the guard position. So I imagine that guillotine started tightening up around the time that Kane was, or around the time Verdum's back was hitting the back, or was hitting the mat, sorry. So, you don't have much time in there. But wasn't there one that was finished with no arm?
I think right? Patrick Williams was like a prayer choke.
One, right?
Yeah, it was like a Marcellitine or like a prayer choke.
That's the way I think a hybrid. I mean, obviously, there's different times for everything. You can jump to the guard with no arm, but if you want to finish a no arm guillotine, it's something like that grip switch, like the Marcellitine, or with the elbow over the back, or anything like that, or something where you can put the head and the guy's head in the middle of your chest. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's just safer. I actually want to talk about that Quinn Mulhern fight. I almost had that arm in like the front naked choke. Kind of that grip on him. He rolled out of it, though. That
ninja choke, I think, is what I've heard it called.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, when you say head in the chest, all I can think of is, I can't even, he may be dead. I can't even remember who he is.
Are you talking about the IFL fight?
No, I was thinking of Scott Jorgensen's finish in the WEC where he had the dude's feet off the ground.
Oh, and the guy ran up the back of the cage.
Yeah,
or something. Yeah, I think I remember that.
He was being brutally choked.
That was
which IFL fight are you talking about? I'm interested to hear about that.
Oh man, I'm talking about that one. I think there was a picture of it where the guy's neck looked like it had to be.
Oh broken. Yeah,
it's against the ropes, I think.
Oh yeah,
that was Scott Jorgensen and Chad George.
Yes,
that was
Chad George.
Yeah, that was one of the first. That was one of the first WEC cards I watched live. And I remember thinking that's one of the cooler things I've ever seen. That was a pretty slick submission. But,
and the guillotine you were talking about from the IFL, by the way, that was Dan Miller and Dave Phillips. Yeah. And Dave Phillips did survive, so it might not look like it looking at that choke. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Pat, you were saying?
Oh yeah, no, just I kind of lost my train of thought there. But fine. So Jason, kind of in a broad sense, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, and this is something I've talked about with a lot of coaches and fighters, is kind of the blend of wrestling and jiu-jitsu. And I interviewed Faraz Sahabi last November, and he talked a lot about that. He talked about the advantage that wrestlers have coming in over people who come from a pure jiu-jitsu background, in that you have both standing grappling and floor and grappling on the ground, and then you have substantial advantages in conditioning and athleticism as well. That the way that he put it was you come in with a black belt and basically with a black belt in conditioning in addition to your actual technical repertoire. And so I was thinking, like, how do you see the relationship at this point between wrestling and jiu-jitsu?
Well, okay. This is how I would, how I would phrase it. Okay, so originally, American wrestling, as we know it, was catch wrestling. You know, they neutered it, to appease like parents, I guess, in high schools. So they didn't want to have kids breaking each other's arms, which doesn't make much sense, right? But anyway, so what that did though is like, a collegiate wrestler, a collegiate American wrestler, even an international wrestler, they understand position. So if you go to a jiu-jitsu school, that's something. If you just walk into a jiu-jitsu school with no grappling experience, that's kind of something that has to be taught to you, because the submissions are like really alluring. Everybody wants to submit somebody, right? But there's no way you're going to submit somebody on your first day. I mean, like as a newbie grappler, you're not going to submit somebody your first day or even your first month. You're going to have to wait for a submission. So if you take a wrestler who already understands that I can't submit people, the way that I win is I put them in positions that I want them in, scoring positions, and then I grind the shit out of them. You don't have to teach that to a wrestler that goes into jiu-jitsu. And then all of a sudden the wrestler that understands this great position, he gets to submit people. Oh, I can twist this guy's arm any way I want. Great, match over. It's kind of like an added bonus, for a wrestler. Like I got into it, I was like, holy shit, this is awesome. I can choke somebody. I can do all the shit that's illegal in wrestling and get rewarded for it here.
And because of the improvement in wrestling ability, it's almost like jiu-jitsu guys have now taken more of a wrestling mindset. Like you can hit like a power half or a chicken wing in wrestling, and a jiu-jitsu guy might tap to it, but the wrestler is going to refuse and roll over, and that's how you get your pin. And so now we have a lot of guys who are using omoplatas and kimuras from a jiu-jitsu background where they're like, okay, I've accepted the fact that I might not finish this submission, but I can at least use the pressure to gain a positional advantage. So now you have kind of this interplay between the two arts.
Yeah. I had a train of thought I was going to go on, but I forgot what it was.
There's a lot of that this morning. It's too early for everybody, I know.
Yeah. No, it's not that early. What was I going to say? I don't remember. Sorry.
No, that's all right. I wanted to ask you, too, about your fight with Andre Galval you had back in Dream, which obviously that's one, it's hard to find a better jiu-jitsu player than that to go against in the mixed martial arts context. And, I thought you may have perhaps had some sympathy watching Cain Velasquez get his shit ruined by Fabricio Verdum over the weekend. Because, Velasquez seemed to have it in his mind from the beginning that he couldn't play in Verdum's guard. He almost felt like he had to stay on the striking, even though Verdum was beating him on the feet, and only then went to the ground when he was too exhausted to be able to make anything more than a token effort at defending that guillotine that Fabricio was obviously just waiting for, because he jumped on it and was grinning when he knew he had it locked up. And you kind of went through not quite the same. Obviously, you had the advantage over Galval in the feet in that fight, but you did find yourself in a couple sticky situations on the ground. And for being a fighter who most of your best wins have come off of your takedown ability, mixing your strikes and your takedowns, going to those ground strikes, wrapping up that guillotine in those transitions. I'm wondering if you can tell us what it's like to as a wrestler, somebody who kind of specializes in that, be faced with somebody who you might feel like you can't use your best skill set safely against them.
Well, for that fight we just did, I didn't have any really like formal jiu-jitsu experience. I had never trained in the gi, anything like that. It was just mostly just submission grappling style stuff, but I knew how to grapple, I knew how to defend myself, and so we just went from there. We in practice I put myself in a bunch of bad positions. I was training with Antonio McKee then, and we were in good shape, and I could defend myself, and I knew where I needed the fight to happen. Like, I wasn't really necessarily afraid to grapple with him, and I don't think you kind of got to be prepared for that. Like, so it's not about really starting like in these good positions in practice. We would just get tired and then start in bad positions, like defend yourself. Going back to that, like, what I was talking about in jiu-jitsu, the first day you walk into a jiu-jitsu school, if you're, new to the sport, it's not going to be like super glamorous. You're going to be on defense. You're going to be tapping out to little bitty people and nerds and all kinds of people that you would see in the street and be like, I kick that.
Nothing worse than tapping out to a nerd.
So, yeah. So, I mean, today's MMA, like I said, everybody's got to be prepared to fight everywhere. So you see a guy like Verdum, who's definitely improved his stand-up in the past few years, is a world jiu-jitsu champion, and Kane has evolved also, but I don't know. I actually haven't watched that fight yet, but I saw,
you gotta check
highlights.
It
out. And I saw the, Kane diving in on that last takedown. It kind of just looked like he looked like just tired, like more tired than I've seen him,
He was dead tired by that point. It was almost like not to accuse a champion fighter of wanting to quit, but it was almost as if he was like Verdum having locked in a tight guillotine was an opportunity for him to tap.
But by that point, like the combination of having gotten absolutely battered on the feet, and that affects your judgment, right? When you getting hit in the head 60 or 70 times is gonna lead to some bad decisions, especially if you're utterly exhausted too. Like, I don't think that we've ever seen Cain Velasquez in his MMA career shoot that sloppy a takedown.
Never.
Just leave his
I
head
was just
right
about to
under
say
there.
the way he ran his feet around instead of like using his head to finish. I could definitely tell that he was a little winded, man. So. That Mexico City air, bruh.
Mm-hmm.
No joke.
Yeah, definitely. Try to avoid that place if you can, because we saw a lot of diminished performances, I think, because of that environment.
Yeah.
I think that's probably just about it, actually. I think we're just ready to let you go, Jason. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me, guys.
Of course.
Anytime.
It was an absolute pleasure. And hopefully we can we'll hear from you again soon and find out where we can watch your next fight. I know a lot of people... as a guy who's very active on social media and talking to fans and stuff like that, a lot of people are really looking forward to seeing your return. So whether it's back in the UFC or in Bellator, which is turning into an increasingly, bright place for prospects and fighters such as yourself to go to, it's no longer it's no longer quite the graveyard for MMA careers that it was a couple years ago.
Yeah, sure.
So hopefully we can see you in the ring again soon. Do you have anything you want to, where people can find you on social media and stuff like that? Anything you want to plug before you go?
Find me on Twitter, at Casey Bandit MMA, on Instagram at Jason_Highwalker. And thanks for having me, guys. It was fun.
Of course.
Hey, thank you.
Have a good one, man.
All right, guys. All right, take care.
Okay, so here's another way you can help us out. Go to your couch, lift up the cushions, and scrounge around in the creases for change, lint, like bent paper clips, like a thumbtack that you stab your thumb on and then you scream alone in your living room. Throw all the stuff out except the change. All right, now take that and deposit it into your bank account or your PayPal account. Head over to heavyhandspodcast.com and click on the donate button on the right side of your screen. Whatever money you just found, which you weren't using anyway, send it to us, all right? Because Pat and I will use it. That money helps us keep this show on the air and free of charge, which is great for you. It's great for us because that way we're making a little bit of money. The donations are a huge deal for us. So please go to heavyhandspodcast.com. Any spare change that you might have lying around, hit the donate button on the right side of the screen and send it our way to help us keep this show live. Thanks. And now back to Heavy Hands. And we are back. First of all, thanks once again to Jason High for joining us. Such a laid-back and pleasant dude to talk to for somebody who specializes in mashing people's faces into pulp. So just a pleasant experience there, and we hopefully have another big interview coming for you guys in the coming weeks as well. So we'll drop a little more on that as it solidifies and presents itself. Is it solidified, Pat?
I think it is mostly solidified. Yeah, I think we're almost there.
Okay. So we won't mention it then until it's solidified, because I once made the mistake of saying we're going to be interviewing so-and-so, and then it falls through, as it happens. These are busy people with busy lives, Pat.
Well, busy people with busy lives, and in some cases, flaky people.
Flaky people with busy lives, or just...
Yeah, that is a thing. It's a thing that happens here.
So we're going to spend the rest of the show talking a little bit about the moments that stood out to us from UFC 188, and there is one obvious fight that stood out to us as being very worthy of discussion. I think you all at home know what fight I'm talking about. Of course, I'm speaking of Cathal Pendred versus Augusto Montano. Was really, I'm sure, the fight that everyone went home thinking, man, I really want to see more of that. Just
yeah, that was fucking terrible. It was just awful. But the reason that we're going to discuss it is because I think the way I just described it to you is an unstoppable force versus an immovable object.
Yeah.
The unstoppable force being Montano's seemingly aimless willingness to circle at range, and the immovable object being Pendred's complete inability to do anything resembling cut-off circular movement. Like, both guys contributed to making that a terrible fight, like in very different ways. And I think it's worth talking for a minute about exactly how, about breaking down the exact nature of the terrible ways in which they screwed that up.
Yeah, it was a rough one to watch, and it was because, I mean, neither guy had the skill set to implement the game plan they wanted to use against their opponent. You know, Pendred obviously wanted to do what Cathal Pendred does, which is mash you against the fence and drag you to the ground and smother you, and, you know, at certain points he had success with that, but, you know, he really struggled to even get to the place where he could do that because, I mean, technically speaking, his footwork is just not there. He doesn't really seem to know how to cut the cage. For whatever reason, despite the fact that he is definitely the slowest fighter out of SBG Ireland, quite possibly the slowest man in the division.
He's relative to his competition, he's one of the slowest fighters in the UFC. I mean, like, right. We say that with, like, Cathal Pendred, like, let's preface it with this. Cathal Pendred seems like a good dude. Seems like a nice guy. We know he's a hard worker. We know he's willing to make sacrifices. I think the only reason he won that fight is because he was willing to go to Mexico and do his training camp in Mexico and make sacrifices and train at altitude and do all that stuff.
And evidently pay basically all of his fight paycheck to make his training happen there.
Yeah, I mean, and credit to him for doing that. Like, he legitimately deserves credit for that. On the other hand, this showed the limitations of his game to a really great extent because he couldn't cut off the movement. There are ways to cut off circular movement. You are not doomed as even a relatively slow-footed guy to just be forced to let your opponent circle. Like, there are tools to do that. You can cut off their angles. You can use your kicks to cut off their movement. You can throw wide looping punches. You have avenues available to you to cut off that movement and slowly but surely force them back towards the fence if that's your goal. Pendred didn't really do any of that, and it didn't look like he knew how to cut off circular movement anyway. The fact that Montano was fleeter of foot did not help Pendred in that. But then again, on Montano's side of it, he stuck and moved without ever actually sticking. He never actually set his feet and threw to catch Pendred as he was chasing him.
And I don't really mean to insult Pendred. Like George Foreman was slow. Like, being slow is not the thing that will destroy a fighter's career. You can be slow and make it work. The reason I bring that up is because, you know, I don't know if this is a failure of training or something, or if Pendred is just really difficult to teach. But I suspect that it's something kind of endemic to the MMA style of striking we tend to see out of fighters from SBG. Like Paddy Holohan is very much like this. Conor McGregor is very much an anomaly when it comes to the striking at SBG, and that's because of his boxing background and because I think he still pursues a lot of striking training independently. But Pendred tries to strike like he is Patrick Holohan, even though he is not. You know what I mean? He's like a very big, strong, slow middleweight. And so I always look for Cathal Pendred's lead right uppercut when I'm watching him fight, because at a certain point I know he's going to throw it. He's going to look at his opponent and think, okay, I've tried strikes A, B, and C, now to try strike D, and he will just throw a right uppercut in the hopes that the opponent will run themselves into it. And what's missing from his game is, in addition to the cage cutting kind of tactics you mentioned, you know, using side steps and pivots off, back foot pivots, and using round circular attacks to cut off movement. He doesn't have any setups either. And so he's never going to trick an opponent into running into that what I'm sure is a thunderous right uppercut, but it's never going to happen. And for Augusto Montano's part, I think what we really saw in that fight, Pat, was a perfect example of a fighter being told exclusively what not to do, which I think is a really flawed way of approaching strategy. If you're trying to prepare your fighter to win a fight, you don't want to tell him, okay, you cannot go to the ground with this guy. Like, this is something that was brought up when I did my gaps in the armor piece for Chris Weidman versus Vitor Belfort. And I think I may have mentioned this in the show before, and a couple people said, you didn't mention the takedowns. And it's because I'm thinking, if I'm trying to prepare Vitor Belfort to fight Chris Weidman, I'm not going to tell him you can't be taken down. I might prepare him, in fact, for the eventuality of being taken down. But I think if I'm Vitor Belfort's coach, I stand a better chance of getting him to stuff takedowns by making him feel confident that he doesn't have to worry about them. And
yeah, I mean, if you're worried about it, you're going to freeze, and when you freeze, you're going to do whatever you're going to end up vulnerable to whatever that thing is you were hoping to avoid. Like, you know, if you're Augusto Montano's coaches, like, sure, you want to limit the opportunities that Cathal Pendred gets to put you into the clinch. On the other hand, you can't panic when he gets you there. You have to be able to work on, you know, grabbing an overhook, head pressuring and getting off, creating space and getting off, right? Like, you can't limit everything to, well, I'm just not going to get put in that position in the first place, because at some point you're going to get put in that position. Contrast that with the way that Verdum reacted when Kane shoved him to the fence and started working his overhook and head pressure game. Verdum ate a couple of shots, but then he grabbed his overhook, he turned, and he got out. Like, you know, there's a distinct point, and Connor, I don't know if you caught this, where Verdum got shoved to the fence for like the third time in the first round, and you can see right behind him Rafael dos Anjos stand up, throw his arms in the air, turn around, and like look like he was going to leave the arena. But then immediately, as soon as Kane pushed him there, Fabricio got off the fence.
I missed that. Dos Anjos was getting frustrated about it?
Yeah, Dos Anjos was super frustrated that Fabricio was not following the game plan. But
and that's perhaps a lesson that Dos Anjos could learn for his rematch with Nurmagomedov. You know, not to get frustrated, because the thing is we've spoken many times before about Cordero's coaching style. It's all about building confidence and kind of positive reinforcement, which might sound like hippie nonsense to some people, like, oh, you know, they're fighters or whatnot. But the idea is you're trying to cultivate you're trying to cultivate his ego, kind of. You don't want to just fluff his ego, but you want him to come into a fight as confident in his ability to win as he can be. And so what we saw was, I mean, unfortunately, the level of technical instruction in Montano's corner was also very low. Like what? Yeah. But that limited them, because instead of all they could do was tell him what to avoid. And it was very clear that Cordero wasn't telling Verdum, don't get pushed against the fence, because you don't want to get mashed against the fence by Cain Velasquez. Rather, what he was telling him was, if he does get you against the fence, here's what you do. You know, you are going to do this. You have an option to get out of this. You can escape. You can turn the game around on him. And as the fight went on, Verdum became more and more confident. And he used his height really well, too. For a guy like Cain Velasquez, who relies on being able to smash people upright against the fence and kind of take the use of their hips away from them, it was a pretty easy thing for Verdum to just negate that by just staying tall and slipping in his elbows for the double collar tie and then using his footwork to circle out.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that, honest to God, here's a little bit of insider information for you. Like, Verdum has been working on that. The overhook head pressure circle out, or the double collar tie create space circle out. He's been working on that consistently for like 3 years. Like, I remember going in on a Saturday to work my training, and he was in there with some big wrestler dude and his wrestling coach, and they just worked on that for an hour and a half. Just that was the only thing they worked on that day. Mm-hmm. But the point about confidence matters, because obviously he had the technical acumen to do it. Like, we know that. I mean, it's clear that he does, because he's had it in other fights too. He had it when Mike Russo pushed him up against the fence in their fight. That was like 3 years ago. Like, he's had the technical ability to do it, but having the confidence to do it against Cain Velasquez in a title fight at 7,500 feet is different. That's a different. The context matters there, you know.
And that's why we're drawing this weird parallel between Velasquez Verdum and the second fight on the Fight Pass prelims between Montano and Pendred, because, you know, we saw two fighters put in very similar situations, obviously at different levels of competition, but, you know, if you're Augusto Montano, Cathal Pendred is the Cain Velasquez of who you're looking to fight in the near future. That's a guy who is going to put that kind of pressure on you and wear you down. That's a difficult, grinding fight. And Augusto Montano has the skills to knock Cathal Pendred out and to beat him. He you know, I even thought, you know, had he approached this fight correctly, I truly believe that he could have beaten a guy like Cathal Pendred. The problem is that he found himself in these situations in which that he didn't want to be in, and his response was to be upset that he'd been put in those situations. And it was very, very clear, not just technically, but you know, emotionally. Fabricio Verdum was completely not happy to be pinned against the fence. I'm trying to think of a good way to phrase this, but comfortable knowing that he had a way out of there, you know. And so that really was, as the fight wore on, it became increasingly clear that Cain Velasquez was the one whose confidence was wilting, and Verdum came into the fight as confident as ever, you know, just completely and utterly fearless. And that moves us on to another thing I think Bear is saying about this fight that I think is a really important distinction between this and all of Velasquez's past opponents, which is that Fabricio Verdum stood his ground with Cain Velasquez, and I don't think anyone else has managed to do that to the same effect. Would you agree?
Yeah. Well, nobody else has really succeeded in doing it. And like, I think that, you know, it seems to me that a lot of the post-fight commentary, no matter how well-intentioned or intelligent in general, has missed the basic dynamic of the fight, which is exactly that. It's that Fabricio stood his ground out in the middle of the cage. Like, Cain's entire game, everything about Cain's game is predicated on pushing you backwards toward the fence. Like, and it makes up for his relative lack of height. When your back is to the fence, he feels perfectly comfortable exchanging because he can set the distance, right? Yeah. He can set his pocket and work from there. He's not afraid to exchange with you because your feet are out of position, and chances are you can't generate a tremendous amount of power. Like, everything in Cain's game is predicated on having your back to the fence. Like, that's where he does his best work, and everything he does out in the middle of the cage is intended to push you back.
Yeah,
like. He's not comfortable there. I mean, even his takedowns and his groundwork are much more effective when you are smashed up against the cage than they are out in the middle. That's the entire basis of his game, and much easier said than done, especially for a guy who had no demonstrated ability or history as a counterpuncher in Verdum, that he was just able to set his feet and throw back. Like, and there he was able to make his height work in his advantage. Like, we consistently saw Cain's strikes coming up 2, 3, 4 inches short. Not coincidentally, that's exactly how much taller Fabricio is than Cain Velasquez. Like, suddenly, when you take away Cain's greatest ally, the fence, not that he looks average, but he looks a hell of a lot less threatening. He looks a lot less like the Terminator and a lot more like a relatively undersized heavyweight with whose striking game on its own is not incredibly threatening if he can't fall forward into the clinch.
Absolutely. And the comparison became really clear when I went back, and I'll have an article coming out very shortly after this episode that looks over this. But I looked back at Cain's rematch with Junior Dos Santos, and you know, you might look at the first 10 seconds of this fight against Verdum and that fight and say that Dos Santos' strategy was better. Because what happens in the first 10 seconds of Velasquez versus Verdum, Verdum eats a leg kick and counters with a right hand, which you might call that an equal exchange, if not a slightly favorable one for Verdum. Then they get into a kind of wild exchange where Cain lands a couple shots. Verdum can't really land cleanly. Verdum goes for a kick, and Cain hits him with a clean jab and knocks him down. So that is obviously not exactly where he wants to be. Meanwhile, Junior Dos Santos evades every punch that Cain Velasquez threw at him in their second fight for probably the first 3 minutes of the fight. But the thing is that from the very beginning, Dos Santos allowed Velasquez not only to build confidence for himself, but to kind of set the tone for the bout, that he was going to be able to push Dos Santos back, that when he flashed his jab, that when he bulled forward and came in with this awkward head movement and these kicks, that Dos Santos was going to retreat. And Verdum, on the other hand, despite the fact that he got he put himself in a riskier situation. He established from the get-go that he was not going to let himself be pushed back. He wasn't going to let it happen easily. And though he did get put against the fence numerous times, every single time he was wearing on Velasquez as it happened. Until eventually, towards the end of the second round, he was pushing Velasquez backwards. And then by the third round, they were completely in the middle of the cage. Velasquez couldn't even get Verdum's back near the fence.
Yeah, I mean, by that point, Velasquez was the one moving backwards. And that's when Verdum really started to have his success, is when he was able to push Cain backwards and get those punch kick combinations going. Really put volume on him. Keep Cain at the end of his own punches. That's when he got him hurt, because Verdum too is kind of is a move forward kind of striker. That's when he does his best work, is when he can push you backwards, because he's going to be longer than you are most of the time. That allows him to grab the clinch real quick, fire off a knee, then push off, create space, and get away again. Like, he's basically an outfighter.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of outfighters really actually do their best work as they move forward, but they need that space in the first place to be able to move forward.
Yeah.
Looking back at my prediction for this fight, that's why I thought Cain was going to win. I thought that Cain was going to be able to take away the space that Verdum needed. But by standing his ground, planting his feet, and throwing in the middle of the cage, even if Verdum is nobody's idea of a really strong pocket puncher, just the sheer ability to disincentivize Cain from moving forward and disincentivizing him from being able to take away that space, that was enough to create the dynamic for Verdum to put himself in position to win.
Yeah, you might call it fighting against type a little bit, where but Junior Dos Santos tried to fight to his type against Cain Velasquez, and though Junior Dos Santos is a better range striker than Velasquez, he couldn't fight Velasquez's fight well enough to get his own fight to happen. You know what I mean? He couldn't enforce his own will, and Verdum just had great success just by refusing to lose at Velasquez's game, because it's Velasquez as a pressure fighter. You're gonna have to, if you're against a pressure fighter as determined and as mean as Cain Velasquez, you are going to have to fight in his range on his terms a couple times. He's going to force it to happen, and so the way to respond to that is to just send a sort of very clear mental message that I can compete with you here. And then suddenly, by the end of the fight, Cain Velasquez is now fighting Verdum's game, at Verdum's range, retreating and letting Verdum throw those long combinations of marching punches the way that he likes to do. Yes, Verdum was getting countered. Verdum got hit almost as much as Velasquez, but it was very clear by the end of the fight that not only did Verdum have more stamina because he'd been more efficient earlier in the bout, he was just so much more confident because, once he survived those first 2 minutes of the fight, of Cain trying to do to him what Cain does, it was pretty clear Verdum was like, okay, I can do this, and I can feel him wilting already. And that's why obviously to me, Rafael Cordeiro is Coach of the Year. I don't think anyone will even catch up, even though we're only halfway through the year at this point. Bringing both Rafael Dos Anjos and Fabricio Verdum at what we would expect to be the ends of their careers to UFC Gold, and doing it just by playing mental chess better than pretty much anybody else in the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's difficult to overstate the extent to which this traces back to Cordeiro, and it traces back to his game planning, and it traces back to his attitude and all of that, and his ability to take fighters who have a full complement of skills already. Like, there isn't, you don't need to, when Fabricio Verdum or Rafael Dos Anjos shows up to a day of practice, you don't need to show them how to throw a 1-2. You don't need to show them how to use a double collar tie.
Right.
You can take those different components and put them together in meaningful ways for particular opponents. And when you have the kind of experience that Rafael Cordeiro does, you can do really interesting things with pieces that are that variable and that valuable.
Definitely. It's almost like I think of Cordeiro as being like a, I don't know, You very rarely see Cordeiro fighters, guys from King's MMA, with flawless technique. Mm-hmm. In fact, you pretty much never do. But you see them all understanding exactly how they want to use their technique and using it exactly the way they want to. Whether it's a guy like Jake Ellenberger, who was definitely at his best at King's MMA, who was always kind of a reckless striker, but was like reckless with very devilishly clear intent. Or Verdum, or Rafael dos Anjos, Benil Dariush. None of these guys are technical masters on the feet. Most of them are pretty damn good grapplers. You could definitely call them technical masters when it comes to jiu-jitsu, and potentially Ellenberger when it comes to wrestling. But Cordero is very good at taking these kind of mismatched pieces and just, he's not, like you said, he's not rebuilding anybody. But I guess you could say he focuses fighters very well. He focuses the skills that they have exceptionally well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very impressed with everything that he's done. With these guys, and yeah, I mean, like, I think that a lot of what happens on the feet with Cordero's fighters boils down to the fact that they're more aggressive and they hit harder. Frankly, they're a lot of the time they're willing to take a shot to give one back, even if the purpose of giving one back isn't necessarily to hurt the opponent more, but to serve some larger strategic purpose. There's always a strategic purpose behind what Cordero's fighters are doing, it seems to me.
Definitely.
And that's their greatest strength. I mean, even if the tactical application of that and the technical application of that does not necessarily work out perfectly, the strategic application always is. Like, think about, contrast that with, one of my other favorite striking coaches in MMA, Henry Hooft. Like, I love Henry Hooft. I think that he trains some of the most technically sound kickboxers in all of MMA and in kickboxing before that. Like, I love his technique. And I think that he's an incredibly sharp tactical mind that, given a very specific set of circumstances, he's going to be able to come up with the best tactical solution to that. But I think a lot of the time, his guys will fall apart a little bit when the big picture stuff is not going as well. Like the fight between Eddie Alvarez and Donald Cerrone. Eddie Alvarez was doing the right things tactically, and he won the battle and lost the war in the first round of that fight. You want to put pressure on Cerrone, absolutely, but it's a spatial pressure. It's not just, well, I try and wear him down out in the middle of the cage. No, you take away his space and don't let him get into a rhythm. Alvarez won the first round and lost himself the fight in the process by letting Cerrone get off with his attritive style.
Mm-hmm. He was good enough technically to take a Cerrone fight from Cerrone early on, but in that he granted Cerrone the fight he wanted.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the time too, like, Hooft's tendency toward negative reinforcement works against him in the corner in the middle of a fight. So I think that contrast is an interesting one. I think they're both elite coaches. I think they're both Cordero and Hooft are some of the elite coaches in MMA. But thinking about those contrasts helps us understand what it is that makes coaching work in general.
Or contrast Hoof with Cordero, or with Javier Mendez and Bob Cook, who I think can often be mean as hell in the corner, the coaches from AKA, but are usually positive, usually trying to build their fighter up. And so what did we see? The perfect example of that kind of mental approach. Hooft's words to Anthony Johnson, fateful last words against Daniel Cormier were, "Don't give up." That's, I don't know, like, that to me is, I guess that is kind of positive reinforcement, but that automatically, if you're telling the guy don't give up, automatically puts the thought of giving up into his mind. Meanwhile, we have Javier Mendez and Bob Cook, like, just building up Daniel Cormier. And people complained after the Cormier-Jones fight that Mendez's coaching was limited because it was very little technical advice, and he was just trying to give Cormier a boost when he was clearly being ground away by John Jones. But, that works for people, and I really think that...
And technically, you would I think a lot of people would assume that that you and I would always be advocating giving technical advice in the corner. Technical advice is not always what fighters need. Like,
definitely.
Look at Silva Franklin, where Matt Hume is trying to fill Rich Franklin's head with technical advice after he's literally been knocked out at the end of the round.
Yeah.
Like, technical advice does not do a concussed fighter any good.
Definitely.
Does not help them.
That's why a partnership, like, even if we've kind of said we feel like they're falling behind, a partnership like Jackson Winklejohn is so good, because Winklejohn's there to give the tactical advice, and Jackson is there to make sure that the fighter is mentally sharp, is making sure that they know they can still win. Jackson takes that a little too far sometimes, but he has one of the winningest MMA teams in the history of the sport as a result. And Cordero's the same way. And, when guys are giving technical advice, I don't know, like, what's another good example? Like, Dwayne Ludwig lost sight of the strategic goal in Mendez versus Aldo too. And Henry Hooft with Eddie Alvarez. He was saying, circle away from those kicks and everything. Yeah, great advice, but you need to, Alvarez really needed to know how to make those kicks not a problem anymore. Not to respond to them technically, but I don't know. He needed to have more of a strategic focus. And so I think that's why I'm really, really impressed with Rafael Cordero's work over there at Kings MMA this past year. I think he's really, even though he's a middle-aged guy now, I think he's really coming into his own as a top MMA trainer, having put all of his experience together. So I'm excited to see both Dos Anjos and Verdum defend their belts, and to see guys like Dariush coming up through the ranks and see what they can do in the future. Pat, do you have anything coming out that you would like to tell the folks at home about?
Just a Sherdog top 10 this week on elbows. Some of the best elbows in MMA history. Got my preview of this weekend's fight between Jessica Penne and Joanna Jędrzejczyk. You should absolutely be watching that fight if you're a fan of elite striking. Joanna Jędrzejczyk is an elite striker. I think she's probably going to knock Jessica Penne's block off inside of 10 minutes or so. I don't know. Connor, real quick, do you have any thoughts on that fight?
Oh, man, it's a tough one. I have a lot of respect for what Penne does. Penne is a very crafty grappler, and that's really her specialty. She's a great mixed martial artist, but I do think she kind of lacks that strategic focus at times, and that is really what showed in Jędrzejczyk's fight with Carla Esparza, where even if she spent the first few parts of that fight getting tied up in wrestling exchanges, she didn't respond to them like Augusto Montano responded to the wrestling exchanges with Cathal Pendred. It was very different. She was, okay, you might get in my legs, but every single time you do, I'm going to hit you. And she got a little, she was fortunate to hit Esparza with one shot on one of those breaks that really hurt Esparza, and that kind of set the tone for the rest of the fight. But regardless, you could see the direction that this 5-round bout was heading, was that Esparza was going to work hard for takedowns and then fail, and then Jędrzejczyk was going to hurt her a little bit for trying. And that really saps the will and the confidence out of somebody. So seeing that kind of takedown defense against a wrestler as accomplished as Esparza, and seeing the brutality that she laid on Carla afterwards, I do think that Jędrzejczyk, I don't know, she hasn't been a huge knockout artist in the past, but you just kind of get the feeling that she's really coming into her own as a mixed martial artist now, and that we're going to see more finishes from her as she continues her reign as champion.
Yeah, it's only a matter of time before Joanna Jędrzejczyk is knocking people's blocks off, and I think this is the fight where maybe she does that, especially because Penne is, we haven't really seen very much of it in her MMA career, and certainly not in her UFC career, but Jędrzejczyk is, I actually think she's a better kicker than she is a puncher.
She's a great kicker. She just doesn't do it because I think she fears being taken down.
Yeah, and I think that as she gets more comfortable in MMA, she's only been fighting professionally in MMA for 3 years.
Yeah.
She is a legit phenom in that sense. As she gets more comfortable, we're going to see her kick more, and I think she's going to be more willing to kick against Penne, who is not a shot takedown master. Like Carla Esparza is really good at grabbing kicks and taking you down. Jessica Penne has not really shown that skill set, Yeah. So I think that as time goes on, Jędrzejczyk is only going to get more brutalizing and more terrifying.
We've already seen more knees from Jędrzejczyk. We've seen a little more lower body action. So it's only a matter of time, I agree, before those kicks start to make an appearance. And even until then, she's getting better and better as a boxer. So I'm always happy to watch somebody throw dangerous hands like that.
Yeah, and very dangerous hands. God, she's got some pop in her hands.
Definitely. I will definitely be having something about that fight coming out. I don't know if it's ready, if it's time yet to do a gaps in the armor for Jędrzejczyk. Maybe that's just because I really don't feel like it's going to happen for Penne. But I will have something on that fight. I'm going to have a breakdown of
Verdum Velasquez?
Verdum Velasquez coming out very shortly, as I mentioned before. A couple other things, maybe a little video on Kimbo Shamrock, which should just be the fight of the century. I know we're all really anticipating that one. Patricio Pitbull is fighting this weekend as well, everybody. Patricio Freire is fighting this weekend. So watch that. Not enough attention on that guy as a dangerous guy at the leading edge of MMA striking. So I think that about does it. Pat, they can find us on social media. How?
I am at Patrick_Wyman on Twitter, and Connor, you are at Boxing BUSCH. Is that correct?
That is correct, and I really am wishing more and more with each passing day that I'd chosen a name that didn't have to be spelled out for people to find me. And they can't spell my original last name anyway, so I guess half a dozen of one, something, six, whatever the other.
Yeah, you win some, you lose some.
That's right. You can also get in touch with us, guys, if you have a longer request or suggestion by emailing Connor at heavyhandspodcast.com. Please give the show a follow on Twitter. And like I said before, we got some big things coming in the next few weeks. Hopefully some really fun interviews. Aldo McGregor is just around the corner. So definitely both of us are looking forward to that. We hope you guys are too. And we hope you enjoyed our interview today with Jason High as much as we did. And if you came here for the finer points of face punching, I think it's pretty obvious you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.